Good evening, patrons of the strange. Take your seats and hush the mind for a beat. If a shadow on a red curtain mimed a killing hours before it happened, would you cry trick or omen? You're with Somnolent Conspiracies, where we welcome you properly, ask you to think with us, and keep evidence steady even when the dark is full of theater. Tonight we step into Paris, where a turn-of-the-century playhouse clings to its velvet and its ghosts. 3 times this month, just before the house lights rose, the main drape caught a moving picture no lamp should cast. A man lifted by the throat, a woman crumpling with a slash of light at her ribs, a body dragged by the ankles across a shallow pool that wasn't there. The audience gasped. The orchestra tuned as if nothing had happened. Hours later, the critic who wrote cruelly about the theater was found strangled in a side street. A patron who cut funding bled out in her apartment. A stagehand was fished from the Seine with sand in his pockets. On each night, the same red velvet breathed out the same dark rehearsal. Our investigator does not argue with superstition. She walks past it. She believes in Q stacks, in why velvet drinks light, in what dust settles on a fly rail when someone climbs it after hours. She'll stand under the ghost light at 2 in the morning and watch how air moves across a stage that has seen everything. She'll look for a projector that doesn't look like one, for a dye that darkens under invisible wavelengths, and for the hand that thought murder improves with an audience. Ready? The conductor's baton is up. If the curtain flickers, count the seconds, not your fear. Part 1, the curtain shows a death. Paris had gone to frost and smoke by the time Elise Marchand reached the Theatre Valiant. The square outside held the chill like a breath after a scream. She stood a moment with her hands in her coat pockets and watched her own reflection tremble in the poster case. The poster promised romance and daring, a heroine in a feathered hat, a gentleman with a sword that had never tasted air. The red velvet drape painted across the lithograph looked innocent. Paper is kind. Cloth is not. Camille Noir, the stage manager, met her at the door with the half-smile of someone who has slept on a sofa and called it a bed. She had a clipboard, a ring of keys, and the sort of calm that grows around catastrophe when there is no room left for panic. "Inspector Marchand," she said, "we are still between rehearsals. The company is upstairs in the green room. I told them to keep their voices soft." "Thank you," Elise said. "Show me what you showed the police the last 2 nights." They threaded through the lobby, past the gilt that had long since turned to dull brass, and under the dim balcony into the stage house. The theater smelled of dust and old perfume. Above them, the rigging rose in black ladders and catwalks. The fly system, as the old hands called it, was a forest of ropes and counterweights that lifted curtains and scenery. At the back, at center, hung the main drape, a wall of red with a pile so thick it seemed to drink the light. The ghost light stood on the stage, one bare bulb on a slender pole, holding back whatever wanted to walk there after midnight. Camille led her to the small security office at stage right. A monitor waited with its cold eye. Camille tapped a key and the first recording began. An empty stage, house seats unlit, the red curtain a sleeping animal. Then, without a beam to announce itself, a shadow rose on the cloth. It was not a blur. It was not happenstance. A figure in black lifted another by the throat. The lifted figure kicked, arms bent in that human reach for air that never helps. 6 seconds. The shadow vanished. The stage held its breath. Camille did not look at Elise. She ran the second clip. Another night. The same curtain. A dark line across ribs, clean, swift. The suggestion of a blade only in the aftermath of the body folding. 6 seconds. Gone. The third clip. The weight of legs dragged, heels cutting 2 brief grooves that the cloth knew how to hold. Pull, a pause, another pull. 6 seconds. Gone. Camille stopped the playback. "No projector," she said. "No cue on the board. No lamp strike. I checked the house dimmers. I checked the practicals. Nothing flared. Nothing dipped." "Who was in the building when these appeared?" Elise asked. "House crew. The orchestra warming. The conductor at his podium, grumbling about tempo. The usual ghosts. Nothing more." Elise stood, the monitor's glow washing her face into a colder shade. "Where did you stand when you saw it with your own eyes?" "Here," Camille said, and took her back to the stage. The drape lifted a little in the breath of the room. It was beautiful, which was a kind of lie. Elise walked to the center and reached out. Velvet rose against her fingers like the flank of a horse. It reflected almost nothing. Its color sat at a depth the eye fell into. "What is behind it?" she asked. "Only stage space," Camille said. "No rear screen. No screen. We do not project for this show." Elise nodded. She bent and looked along the floor, seeing the faint pale of dust where feet and wheels had drawn their diagrams. She followed that dust to the wing, then to the iron ladder that climbed toward the catwalks. She looked up. The black iron ribs were lost in shadow. "Do you see it?" Camille asked. "Do you feel it?" When the curtain was dark with that movement, the air felt thinner, as if breath itself stood to watch. "I feel a draft," Elise said, "and something that wants to be a story." She called 2 uniformed officers forward and set them at the stage doors. She signed the order to seal the stage house. She bagged the console logs, the conductor's microphone, and 2 handheld radios, and she wrote her own notes in a tight cursive the size of a secret. Then she climbed. The ladder went past ropes that smelled of hemp and hands. Up there, the world narrowed to steel grating, black tape, and the careful steps learned young or not at all. The rigging above the stage was a town of its own. Elise moved along the catwalk, looking for wires that did not belong, for gaffer tape that had been placed in a hurry, for the odd shine in a world that preferred matte. She found dust on the rail where someone had leaned. She took a swab. A fine soot clung to it. She tested it later, but even then, in that high dim cold, she felt how it caught the light in a way that wanted to be noticed and yet not seen. Camille waited below, a speck that looked up with a tilted chin. "Find anything," she called. "Questions," Elise said, and kept walking. Back on the deck, she asked for a ladder, a soft brush, clean envelopes. She went to work on the folds at the far left corner of the curtain, where hands loved to hide when they waited to pull. She brushed gently, and the brush came away with the suggestion of charcoal. She sealed it. She moved to the right corner and brushed again. Another kiss of black. "Do you treat your curtains?" she asked. "Do you launder them? Do you send them out?" Camille shook her head. "Not the main. It is too dear to risk. We vacuum. We pray." Elise stood with the packets in her hand, light seeping into the room as afternoon tipped toward evening. She wanted to sit in the house and watch the drape until night, but work was not worship. She needed the bowls and lamps of the laboratory, and she needed the theater to hold its pose until she returned. "I am taking the logs," she said. "I am taking these samples. I want the stage house empty by 6. From that hour, no one touches the drape. No one climbs. Lock the fly rail. Post names of keys and where they live. Make a list of every person who could borrow a ladder without asking." Camille's mouth tightened. "You will close us." "I will not close you. Not yet." Elise kept her voice steady. "I have seen tricks that looked like miracles and miracles that looked like tricks. A shadow does not appear by itself. It belongs to something. If the theater performed murder, someone wrote a cue. If there is a cue, I will find it." She walked to the ghost light and put her hand around the iron pole. The bulb hummed. The bare circle of light made the red behind it thirstier. She switched it off, then on again, as if greeting an old friend and putting him back to work. "Tonight," she said, "leave this on until I return." Camille watched her. "Do you believe in omens?" "I believe in people," Elise said, "and in what they will do for attention." She turned once more to the curtain. Nothing moved. That was almost worse. She could not shake the sense that the cloth had a memory that was not its own. She did not speak that thought. She packed her envelopes, signed the seal on the console case, and stepped into the gray light of the alley. On the street, she paused and called in the order that would hold the place tight. She walked away with the slow stride of someone keeping pace with a second mind. Behind her, the facade of the Valiant held its grand, aging face to the city. The red drape hung in its dark, and the empty stage waited. Somewhere inside, under the kindness of velvet, a plan had stitched itself into the evening. Elise intended to tug the thread and watch the whole thing come down. Part 2: The Three Dead and Their Lines to the Stage. By morning, the sky over the river had the color of pewter. Elise Marchand took her coffee in the precinct cafeteria and read the files until the paper edges softened under her fingers. 3 deaths. 3 ordinary streets on 3 different nights. 1 theater tether through a red cloth that refused to be only cloth. Etienne Moreau first. He had written criticism for a paper that loved to wound under the name of wit. Middle age in a good coat. A scarf tied in a way that said he noticed himself. He had left a performance at the Theatre Valiant and walked home on a route so familiar he could have traced it blind. A side street near the river. Strangulation with a scarf that was not his own. The knot had been practiced and clean. No witness. The closest camera showed a blur of 2 shapes and then only Etienne collapsing into the angle where the pavement met a drain. Photographs lay across the table. Elise studied the scarf. She already knew about the carbon trace at the threads, but she wanted more than a test result. She wanted a hand. Isabelle Duval next. Patron of the arts, patron also of her own image. A woman who understood where money looked best and where it did not. She had pulled funding from the Valiant after a rumor traced a crooked line through the name of Lucien Artois. She had been found on the floor of her apartment with a slash across her ribs and a spill of blood that sought the legs of a small table and could not climb them. The cut was made with a narrow blade by someone who understood how quickly silence follows the right angle. No forced entry. A concierge who remembered her returning late with her own keys and no one behind her. A lamp shade with a faint smear that shone only under a lamp far from ordinary sight. Last came Hugo Vasseur, stagehand at the Valiant. He had the easy slouch of men who lift and carry and could make a castle fly if paid enough. He had threatened to report safety violations that everyone treated as part of the romance of theater until a man fell. He had been pulled from the Seine with water in his lungs and sand in his pockets. His boots were scraped along the sides as if his legs had been set wrong on his last walk. He had been alive when he went in. He had not come out by himself. Elise read witness statements, receipts, rehearsal calls, gossip printed tidy as stationery. All 3 names had touched the Valiant within the same month. All 3 deaths had been whispered against the red drape the way a prayer touches the back of a church pew. She went back to the theater, not to climb and test again, but to speak. Camille Noir met her in the lobby, hair tied back, eyes steady. Did Etienne Moreau come backstage after the 3rd preview? Elise asked. He always came looking for someone to quote, Camille said. He wanted the word fragile for our lead. He wanted the word exhausted for the set. He wanted the word finished for the entire house. He stood at the edge of the stage and took a photograph with the red curtain behind him. He did not get permission for that, which is a small sin here, but no one stopped him. Did he touch the drape? I told him not to. He smiled and did it anyway. It is a thing people do, like touching a lion through bars in a kinder age. What about Isabelle Duval? Camille looked toward the balcony, as if the woman might be sitting in the dark with her own pearls. She came to a rehearsal. She stood in the wings with Lucien and made phone calls about dinner while the fight choreographer tried to teach actors not to hurt one another by accident. She took a picture of herself with the curtain. She leaned into it as if it were a friend. And Hugo Vasseur. He helped hang the spare crimson the week before he died, Camille said. He told me the main might not hold if we did another year. He knew how the weight sits. He had a good eye for stress. He said he could feel it in the ropes between his palms. Elise let the lobby breath wash around them. It smelled of old dust, oranges from the usher's hands, and something metallic she could not place that did not belong to blood. Lucien Artois argued in public with each of them, Elise said. Camille did not hide her reaction. Lucien argues in public with the future if it keeps him from the present. He cares about the stage more than the people who make it breathe. He cared about Isabelle's money. He cared about Etienne's pen. He cared about Hugo's silence. Tell me how he argues, Elise asked. You know the type. He steps too close. He uses the word art like a sword and the word loyalty like a bell. He can make a man believe he stands in the light when all he has done is step into a brighter trap. They walked the aisle together. In the low glow, the red curtain seemed to hold the room together. Elise watched how the light settled on its pile, how it found no landing. "Who owes him?" Elise asked. "Maxime Durand," Camille said. "Lucien hired him when no one else did after a design went wrong in another house. Maxime is brilliant. He could draw light as if it were a pencil line. He could also draw a disaster if you looked away. He is prickly, yes. He is loyal to the idea that saved him, and he thinks the man who spoke the idea is the only one who understood it." "Did Maxime argue with Hugo?" "Maxime argues with gravity," Camille said. "He argues with me when I ask him to log cues the way a beginner does. He argues with stagehands who move his lamps half a meter. But he respects the grid. He respects the ones who can climb." "Celeste Moreau," Elise said. "Tell me what she wants." "To make the world look at the Valiant again until our gilding flakes from the heat of attention," Camille said. "She wants each night to birth a photograph that 1,000 strangers will carry to bed. She sells makeup in the daytime and stories at night. She knows the difference between pigment and narrative and how one stains the other." "What did she say when Isabelle pulled the money?" "That there were other patrons who loved blood," Camille said, and made a face as if the taste of the words had gone wrong. "Not literal blood. At least not in the way the sentence sounds when you hear it alone." Elise looked up at the private box where Lucien liked to stand during previews. She could imagine him there, one hand on the rail, eyes narrowed not in doubt but in calculation. The theater was his instrument. He arranged the orchestra, the wires, the faces. He struck at the air and people moved. She found him in his office with a map of Paris pinned to one wall and a stack of papers held down by a stone that might have been from the river. "Inspector," he said, his voice charming by reflex, "you will tell me how to help." "You can start with your arguments," Elise said. "With Etienne. With Isabelle. With Hugo." Lucien smiled with only one side of his mouth. "We are French. We argue. Etienne called us finished. I told him that the only thing finished in this city is a grave." He laughed. Isabelle wanted her name engraved on a wall in gold in exchange for cutting the budget of the chorus. I told her art grows poor when money thinks it is a god. She did not laugh. Hugo came to me with a list of worries. I told him I would fix them. He did not give me time. He went to someone else. "Who?" Elise said. "Himself," Lucien said. "He liked an audience. All crew do. We call it the smaller stage. He loved to make himself the hero who saves the weak from the tower that creaks. The tower will stand longer than either of us if you stop looking at it as an enemy and treat it as a patient. I have always done that. I have done it without money and without mercy." Elise did not write any of that down. She watched the wall map instead. Small dots marked the routes of deliveries. A brighter line tied the theater to a boutique across the river. "Celeste," she said. "Marketing," Lucien answered. "She understands appetite. She understands how to feed it raw," Elise said. He held her gaze. "Tell me you do not want the Valiant to be spoken of again. Tell me you do not want to save it by any means that looks like taste. If you tell me that, I will nod, and then I will sell the chandelier one crystal at a time, and you will have saved a house of shadows that no one will visit." Elise let him finish his sentence. It had the right shape and the wrong soul. She left him with his map and its neat lies. On the way down, she stopped in the wings and touched the floor again. The dust told the same story over and over. It said that hands had pulled, feet had marked, weight had taken and given back. She looked at the conductor's podium, at the path musicians took to their chairs. She waited until the room grew quiet enough to hear the electrical hum that lived in any old building, and then she turned to Camille. "On each night the curtain showed a murder. The real thing followed," Elise said. "The drape is not just decoration. It is a list. Someone makes it into a list by choosing who brushes it. Etienne played with it for a photograph. Isabelle leaned into it for a pose. Hugo worked it with his hands. The theater whispers a rehearsal and the city wakes to a corpse. Camille rubbed her knuckles with her thumb. an old habit of thought. You believe this is planned. I believe in Q stacks, Elise said. Someone wrote one with materials that do not belong to the visible stage. Someone pressed a button. Someone chose victims that would produce noise. Lucien owns the desire. A technician owns the means. If the two are one person, I will learn that. If they are two, I will pry them apart and name each. She looked up, past the red field to the black rafters. There was a way to paint light so it looked like darkness. There was a way to wash fabric so it chose to glow when invisible light touched it. She could feel those ways settle into place like scenery locking into tracks. She needed the lamp that was not a lamp. She needed the hand that held the trigger. She turned for the stage door. Behind her, the red curtain seemed to pulse once. A trick of air, enough to make a few dust motes drift like slow confetti. Elise kept walking. The city was full of eyes that claimed to see. She preferred the ones that waited for a reason. Part 3 Velvet that drinks invisible light. Elise Marchand returned to the Theatre Valiant with a case that held a wand of light and a calm that belonged to rooms where truth prefers to hide. She asked Camille Noir to dim the house until the red curtain drank the last crumbs of gold from the aisle sconces. The ghost light kept its circle near center stage. Everything else went to hush and cool. Elise explained in the plain way she had learned from years of courtrooms. She would run a light sweep. First the colors the eye embraced, then the colors the eye did not welcome without help. If anyone had struck a beam, it would have left a path smudged with dust or oil or the fine drift that lives in theaters. If anyone had laid a film on the fabric would tell it, but not to daylight. She began with the visible. She moved the beam across the proscenium and the front folds of the curtain. She watched for scattering, for any pinprick of reflection that suggested a lens or a sensor or a surface meant to throw images. On the floor, she traced slow arcs to catch the footprint of a lamp set on a stand and taken away. Nothing answered her in the language of glass. The red pile took the light and turned it into something private. She climbed once more to the catwalk and played the beam along the rails. No mirror signaled from the dark. No window in a black box winked back. When she returned to the stage, Camille stood with folded arms. So far we have nothing, Camille said. So far we have only what the human eye expects, Elise said. Now I will ask the cloth to speak a second tongue. She changed the head on her light to a source that threw near ultraviolet, the long wavelength that makes brighteners sing and inks complain. She warned Camille not to stare directly at the glow. She darkened the ghost light and lifted the new beam. The room changed as if a low tide had been revealed. Dull paint showed old spills. A scrap of tape flared on the deck like a lost star. The red velvet did not glow. That was expected. Good theater velvet is made to swallow light. Elise moved the beam to the lower left corner where she had brushed a sample the day before. Something woke there. A whisper of shape where there should have been only nap and shadow. Not a picture. Not a letter. More like the negative of a hand once washed and pressed flat. She played the beam across the opposite corner. A similar stain appeared and then withdrew when she angled the lamp away. She swept higher and found on the hem a faint blurred edge, the way a stencil leaves perfume in the gaps after the pattern has been scrubbed. She switched off the light and let the darkness settle, then turned it on again to be sure her mind had not drawn what it wanted to see. The marks returned, shy but true. Someone has touched these places with more than hands, she said. Something was applied and then wiped. The fabric remembers what the eye does not. Camille watched without speaking. She loved the curtain and did not love to learn it had been used as paper. Elise set the wand aside and opened her case. She took clean swabs and worked them gently along the same edges she had lit. She sealed each in its envelope. She took a small tuft of the fallen nap that collects like red snow along the stage lip where velvet kisses would in every rise and fall. Then she thanked Camille, set officers again at the stage doors, and carried her evidence to the lab. In the clean white of that room, noise fell away until only steps and glass spoke. The samples went to a bench under bright lamps. Elise mixed a little solvent into a vial and touched a swab to it. A faint gray bled into the clear. Under a microscope, the gray resolved into particles with a smile that was not friendly. They ate light. They wanted to be night even at noon. She ran a simple test she had learned from patient chemists who tolerated police because police did not break the glass. The solvent touched a strip with a fluorescent indicator that loves optical brighteners. Optical brighteners are the silent chemicals that laundry makers add so cloth will reflect invisible blue and look whiter than white under sun. The strip answered with a soft glow. Where there is brightener, near ultraviolet light can wake a second picture in the way it changes reflection. She ran another test for a binder that artists have used since long before theaters learned to fly towers. A gum that trees give up willingly when asked, that dries clear and holds pigment the way a steady hand holds a brush. The test said yes. Gum Arabic, mixed with something blacker than soot. She placed a sample of the gray on a slide and studied the grains again. The shape and the way they swallowed light said carbon black. The kind used in inks and paints that must be truly black and not just very dark. She thought of the three dead and how each had brushed the curtain in vanity or in work. She thought of how a brush would drag such a mix across velvet, and how the velvet would not let go easily. She called for materials. A remnant of red velvet, not the same weave but good enough to teach. A bottle of optical brightener in solution. A jar of carbon black. A small amount of gum Arabic dissolved to a syrup. She cut a square of velvet and washed it lightly with the brightener, the way a careful hand might when prepping cloth to respond to light the eye cannot see. She let it dry. She painted on it with a thin mix of gum and carbon. Not a picture, only a line and a blot. She let that dry too. She washed the surface gently to mimic a hurried wipe, the kind a guilty mind does after a rehearsal goes wrong. When the cloth dried, she brought out a lamp that threw a narrow band of near ultraviolet. She killed the room lights. She lit the cloth. It answered. The treated red did not glow like laundry in a cheap nightclub. It shifted, as if the surface had learned a new lesson in how to return light. The carbon line became a pit cut into color. It was not a projected beam raising an image. It was deeper than that. The contrast grew so sharp that the painted black looked impossible. A hole inside the velvet that no beam had dug in the visible world. Elise turned the lamp away and the hole closed. She turned it back and the hole opened again. She set the lamp to one side and brought out a second tool. A simple scanner designed to move a narrow point of light across a surface in fast lines. Like a child running a finger along every line in a book. She played the beam over the cloth in a slow pass. The black line pulsed. The blot crawled the smallest distance. Not projection, not in the old sense. A brush could write shadows if the stage had been taught to read the invisible. She stood very still and let the idea finish itself. Someone had washed the main drape with a thin film of optical brightener. Someone had painted or drawn onto that field with carbon bound in gum. Someone had wiped most of it away, but not all. Then someone had found a way to bathe the cloth in near ultraviolet just long enough to wake the secret picture. To an audience and to a camera, it would look like a shadow performing on red with no lamp to own the act. If the ultraviolet came from a hidden lamp, a narrow beam, a scanner disguised as something ordinary, the trick would seem like an omen rather than a plan. She recorded the steps and their results with the care of a person who expects a defense attorney to call her a magician. She wrote the words without flourish. The drape was prepped to become a screen that looks like ordinary cloth. The shadow was not cast by a visible projector. The shadow was drawn with a material the eye forgives until near ultraviolet tells on it. In the still of the lab, she heard again Camille's voice. No cue on the board. No lamp strike. The bypass did not have to be on the main console. The light could have been tiny and focused. It could have lived inside a case that belonged backstage. It could have taken its orders from a radio pulse that did not belong to music. Elise packed the test panel, the photographs, the strips that glowed when prompted. She looked at the clock and thought of the city outside, how the river carried secrets faster than any car. She returned to the theater with two conclusions and one demand. First conclusion. The curtain had been taught to answer to a kind of light the audience cannot see. Second conclusion. The moving darkness was not chance. It had been painted or scanned into being by a hand that knew how to make attention behave. Demand. Find the lamp that is not a lamp. Find the brush that paints with black that is not quite paint. She met Camille at the stage door and asked for a quiet hour alone on the deck. She turned off the ghost light and let the house be black. She stood in that black and felt the Valiant breathe as if asleep. Somewhere above, in the metal heart of the grid, a tool waited with its face turned down. It had spoken 6 seconds at a time in a voice the eye could not hear. Elise lifted her own lamp, aimed not at the curtain now but at the catwalks, the ladders, the backs of the instruments that looked like instruments and the boxes that pretended to be other things. I am coming, she thought, and walked toward the wing where the heavier smells of resin and oil seemed to thicken. If someone had hidden light inside a skin that belonged on stage, she would open that skin and make the light confess. Part 4. The Lamp That Is Not a Lamp. The third catwalk ran like a narrow road above a red country. From there, the curtain looked less like fabric and more like weather, a storm that could be called by the right name. Elise Marchand moved slowly along the grating with her lamp hooded to a slim oval. Every theater she had ever hunted in taught the same lesson. The tool that does the harm learns how to pretend it has always belonged. She stopped beside a low, boxy unit parked near a cluster of fog machines. It wore the matte black of equipment that had been bought in hope and cleaned in fear. A stage hazer feeds shows with a fine mist so beams of light can draw their lines in air. This one sat a little proud of its neighbors, half a hand longer, a little heavier when she nudged it with her palm. The power cord ran not into the neatly labeled patch panel, but into a free line that snaked away like a stray thought. She crouched and ran her fingers along the cable. The tape that bound it was too new. She checked the tag tied to the handle. Handwritten, quick, almost careless. Hazer 3. Do not roll without 2 hands. She unlatched the housing. Inside, the belly of the machine held the expected pump and reservoir. But bolted to the frame beside them was something else. Narrow as a book and cold to the touch. A head the size of a fist sat at the end of a bracket. Behind a slit of glass lay a mirror that could tilt and nod. A label had been scrubbed with solvent until the letters lost nerve. By shape and by the small voice it made when she woke it with a feather touch, she knew it for a scanning head, the kind that aims a thread of light and sweeps it like a pen across paper. She did not power it. She followed its separate feedback into the tangle. The cable avoided the main dimmer rack with the dainty precision of a thief avoiding guards. It ran down the wall, across a beam, past a coil of rope, and disappeared into a length of conduit that did not belong there last week. Elise traced it to the floor with her eyes and then with her feet. Backstage, she found the conduit rising again into the base of a music stand lamp. It was an ordinary lamp by the look of it, the kind a violinist bends toward paper when a conductor chases shadows too fast. The stand held no score. The lamp was on a switch that faced the wrong direction, turned away as if shy. Inside the base, a junction hid where no junction should. The hazer above drew power from this harmless little neck of brass and shade. If anyone looked, they would see a snake pass by a flute and think only of music. She crossed to the conductor's podium. The top was clean. The slim pencil lay like a blade at rest. She ran her fingers under the lip and felt tape. She eased it loose by degrees until a small device came free into her hand. To fit a palm like a secret, a radio trigger with a tiny switch and a jack for a short antenna. A trigger like this could tell a scanner to wake for 6 seconds and then sleep again like a tired beast. Elise lifted her face to the dim balcony and the dark seats. She pictured the 3 nights, the orchestra tuning, the hush when it should have been chatter, the conductor testing his voice on the microphone, a thumb pressing under the podium where no one would watch. 6 seconds of a private language the curtain had been taught to answer. It would look like a curse to a house that wanted to believe in curses. She rewrapped the device and left it for the crime scene photographer. Then she went back up to the catwalk with a small toolkit and the permission she signed for herself. She opened the modified hazer fully and took careful photographs. The mirror in the head was tilted at an angle that would bounce a narrow beam across the red field. The bracket had adjustment marks scratched into its side with a knife point. She could see the path in her mind. The thin, bright the human eye would not register, tasting the curls and folds of velvet and waking the painted black in fast strokes. The scanner held a small card behind a plate. Elise labeled the screws and eased the card out. She bagged it. She took the side panel as well and the makeshift brackets and the odd screws that did not match the factory set. Then she closed the case and made it look as if nothing had been touched. She left a tiny marker of her own in the form of a hair tucked in felt near the latch, a trick older than her career. If anyone opened it after this, she would know. Downstairs again, she asked Camille Noir to clear the area around the orchestra pit. Camille stood at the rail, hands on the wood as if it were warm. If you tell me we had a machine that was not a machine, Camille said, I will believe you. You had a fog machine that had learned to write, Elise said. Someone put a scanning head inside it and fed it power from a lamp no one would suspect. Someone told it when to speak with a whisper from this podium. Not a cue on the main board because a cue on the board would leave a scar. A private switch leaves only a heartbeat on a microphone. Camille frowned. A heartbeat. Click, Elise said. A tiny sound, the kind metal makes when a switch moves. I will hear it again when I pull the audio from your recordings. It will be the same second the shadow wakes. She took the hazer's memory to the lab, a dull room that made all ambitions pick up a number and wait. A technician coaxed the contents of the card onto a screen. Elise leaned in. Her files sat like 4 doors. Strangle, / drag, fall. Each contained lines clean as wire drawings. They were not film frames but vectors, as if someone had decided that violence looks best when it is geometry. She scrolled through the shapes. A hand became a curve that closed around a throat. A blade became a long sweep with a short cross to mark the entrance. A pair of legs turned into 2 stiff strokes with small ticks to imply heels. The fall was a body drawn with a parallel bar to mark a balcony rail and an arc that gave gravity the last word. Whoever drew this knows the grammar of light, the technician said, and likes to sign their name in the corner no one checks. The files had metadata a careless mind forgets to strip. The creator tag did not give a name, only a device string that matched a laptop model Elise had seen on many lighting desks. She did not say the name that came up in her head. She asked for the timestamps and for the last access. The card had been written to 2 nights ago and again this morning. Updating the fall. Practicing, then polishing. Hunger does that. Fear does too. Elise carried the images back to the theater printed on paper that would never make them look gentle. She set them on the conductor's stand and let Camille look. Who would do this? Camille asked. Her voice did not rise. She had already climbed too many ladders for panic. A person who believes a show improves when the city helps with the applause, Elise said. A person who can make a lamp wear another lamp's face. A person who does not mind a hand near a throat so long as the drawing is clean. She walked to the front of the stage and looked out into the empty seats. The Valiant had known triumphs and small frauds and 2 nights when the roof sang in rain so loud the actors learned to shout like sailors. Now it had learned to breathe in a new way, one that could make an omen with a beam the eye did not own. She touched the podium again and looked under it, at the naked wood where the tape had left its clean stripe. She could almost feel the press of a thumb and the slight jump in the microphone. She could almost see the conductor's face as he felt the whisper of power travel through the stand. And she could see a second hand somewhere else drawing money out of air and calling it marketing. We will take this rig down, she told Camille. We will keep it intact and we will blind it. But first we will let it speak once more, this time into a room that is listening. When it speaks, it will tell us who pressed the switch. She left the stage with a plan that fit 6 seconds of light and the long patience of a trap. The city outside went on with its own rehearsals. Inside, the red curtain hung in its sulk of color, still as an animal that has been trained to freeze when it hears the first bar of a familiar song. Part 5, The Hands That Know Both Art and Wire. Elise Marchand began with the person who could draw light like a line and bend a stage to his temper. Maxime Durand kept his desk in a corner of the dim workroom where spools of cable sat like sleeping snakes and gel frames leaned against a wall in a tired rainbow. He had the pale of a man who worked nights and then forgot to come up for sun. His hands were nicked and clean at once, a contradiction common to those who measure their lives in millimeters and risk. He looked past Elise at the door as if ready to work the moment she stopped asking questions. You have been with the Valiant how long? She said. 8 years, he said. minus a few months when someone thought I should learn humility in a smaller house. It did not take. You designed the current show. He nodded. I designed the light the audience thinks it sees. The rest is only the theater breathing. You know how that works. You carry a light of your own and pretend it is only a badge. She did not let him choose the ground. The fog machine on the third catwalk has a second heart in it. A scanning head that sweeps a narrow beam. There is a power bypass that feeds from a music stand lamp. There is a trigger hidden under the conductor's podium. The memory card holds vector drawings of a strangling, a slash, a dragging, a fall. The files were written by a device like the one on your bench. Maxime did not flinch. He leaned back and folded his arms. If you searched every desk in this building for something that looks like work until you call it a weapon, you would never sit down again. I have a scanner because designers test patterns. I have drawings because light needs a plan. I have anger because people die in this house and the city ignores us until a rumor makes a better meal. Who put the scanning head into the hazer, Elise said. He looked at his hands, then at the rack of gel frames. I did. He lifted his eyes. I built the trick. I did not draw blood with it. Why, she said. Because Lucien said the curtain should live, Maxime said. He has a voice that makes verbs stand up. He said the main drape should breathe. He said 7 seconds was all the audience could bear before magic went thin. I sent him a sketch of a shadow lifting a hand. He said a hand does not sell. He said a story sells. The house has not sold out in a year, and I am not paid to argue with the cost of ropes. Did he tell you to make the shadows match the deaths? Elise said. Maxime's face changed in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with shame. No. He said only that a curtain that moves before the show begins would draw eyes. He said a hush is currency. He said do it quietly because auditors dislike innovation. He paid me through the petty cash safe because the big account is watched by men who do not know the difference between a lamp and a light. If those men knew how stage air tastes, they would not cut it with their knives. Elise laid the printed vectors on his bench. He did not reach for them. He knew their shapes already. He had drawn them with lines as clean as bone. Who chose the 4 pictures, she said. I did, he said. I am the designer. If you ask me who chose the bodies, I would ask you why anyone thinks a designer controls a city. Your files were updated this morning, Elise said. The fall was polished. The arc is cleaner. The balcony rail is now a little higher. He looked at her finally as if she had stepped too close to a drop. There is a gala tonight, he said. The donors will sit where they can be seen by each other and by the camera they carry inside their heads. If you are laying a trap, you are not the only one who knows how to bait a hook. She let him sit with that. What do you owe Lucien? She asked. Career, Maxime said. And a debt I do not like to count in public. He hired me after another house fired me for a lamp that fell and broke a line of chorus. No one died. 3 bruises. 2 complaints. A review that called my design reckless. Lucien read it and said reckless is only courage spelled by a coward. He gave me this desk. He asks me for miracles in the currency of promises. I have kept some. He has kept fewer. What do you owe Camille Noir? Elise said. Maxime's mouth softened. I owe her the habit of logging cues even when I distrust the board. I owe her the habit of checking knots with my fingers instead of my eyes. Her father taught me those last 2 habits by dying on a scaffold. She taught me the rest by staying in this house when she could have left for a new one that does not smell like history. Camille stood in the doorway now, as if summoned by the memory of her father. She had a stack of maintenance reports under one arm. Elise turned to her. I want it on the record, Elise said, to hear you say what this house means to you. Camille met her without romance. It means weight, she said. It means a ledger of near falls that could have been falls and falls that taught us to bolt harder next time. It means a promise to people who pay to sit in the dark that nothing may hurt them unless they choose to be hurt by a story. My father died in a place like this. Not this house. Another like it. He died because someone thought the rule about double-checking a clamp was for other people. I do not forgive houses. I forgive people who learn. I do not think Lucien learns. I think he improvises. Improvisation is what you do when the truth is cheap. Elise nodded. Did you ever see Celeste Moreau near the curtain outside of a show? Camille shifted the reports. She sells makeup that glows under light people cannot see. She came with a bag one afternoon and said she was testing looks for the lead actress. She is not an artist. She is an agent. She sells attention. She will make a bruise on a cheek look like a poem if the camera is good enough. She asked if the curtain could be washed. I told her no. She smiled as if the word no were a joke people tell to pass time between yes and yes. Elise found Celeste in a boutique that smelled of perfume and ambition. She stood behind a counter arranging bottles that promised sheen under club light. Her clothes were careful and her eyes unblinking. She greeted Elise by name as if they were old friends who had never done each other a favor. The Valiant has always been a dream that needed a louder voice, Celeste said. If you have come to ask about my charity, I will show you receipts. I have come to ask about your shopping, Elise said. Optical brighteners by the case. Carbon black fine enough to live inside ink. Gum Arabic for those who like their pigments to behave. All purchased in the name of this shop. All used to teach a red curtain to answer like a screen. Celeste did not feign surprise. She looked pleased, as if someone had finally caught up with her. In another age we called it showmanship, she said. The curtain should breathe. The city should watch. The house should fill. No one is hurt by a shadow. 3 people are dead, Elise said. People die every day without a theater to mark the hour. Celeste said. If you want me to weep, speak the names with more care than you say murderer. I arranged a campaign. The city provided its own cruelty. Do you think I would risk a jail cell for a trick? Do you think I do not have a lawyer who eats police for breakfast? Elise looked around at the shelves. Small bottles, soft brushes, a mirror that made faces kinder than they deserved. Do you sell what you used on the drape? She asked. I sell anything that makes a story brighter, Celeste said. But the wash is not for skin. It is for cloth. It is for legacy. When you have legacy, you must discuss stain removal. That is all this is. A little science. A little faith. Who pressed the trigger, Elise said. Celeste smiled without showing teeth. The conductor cannot keep time without tapping the podium. The theater breathes. The city breathes. Who can say which breath begins? Elise left her with a warning that sounded dull even to her own ears. Dull is what you carry when the person before you has decided the law is only a shade of opinion. Outside, she called for bank records and for an audit report on Lucien that had been whispered but never finished. Money moves faster than confession. She returned to the Valiant and stood with Lucien in the quiet of the empty house. He had rearranged a stack of programs 3 times and then left them crooked on purpose. He liked his fingerprints on surfaces people thought no one touched. Your marketing partner ordered chemicals that turned your red curtain into a blackboard for invisible light, Elise said. Your designer built a lamp inside another lamp and fed it from a wire that did not go through your main console. A radio trigger under your podium sent 6-second whispers. The shadows matched the deaths. Lucien lifted his hands. The city hears a drum in every footstep. You will call this conspiracy because men died. I call it preparedness because audiences die when they are bored. He paused. If you have come to fetch me for a cell, bring a better rope. If you have come to save the Valiant, do not do it by burning the stage. Elise held his gaze until the charm in his eyes set and cracked. I will decide who pressed the switch, she said. If it is you, you will learn the drum in footsteps here is the sound of a guard. If it is another, you will sit close by while I name your benefit. Want is motive enough when blood is a byproduct of want. She took the long walk back to the stage and looked up into the high dark. The list of hands who could have done this was short, and each hand belonged to a person who loved attention in a different way. Maxime loved the clean line. Camille loved a promise kept. Lucien loved a house that said his name louder than any actor. Celeste loved the storm that follows a headline. Somewhere in that, whether a thumb had pressed and a man had stopped breathing. Elise set a timeline on paper. She drew 2 columns. Enthraller. Engineer. She put names in both and arrows between them. She marked the 3 deaths and the 3 shadow nights. She left space for a 4th shadow that had rehearsed itself without her consent. The gala would give her that space or close it forever. Prove who pressed the button, she wrote. Then she capped her pen and went to instruct a team on how to listen for a whisper that would betray a hand. Part 6. A fourth shadow rehearses itself. The rehearsal call sheet said warm-up at 3, notes at 4, a stumble through with the orchestra at 5. The house felt like a big animal turning in its sleep. Elise Marchand stood just off stage left beside Camille Noir, who watched the red curtain with the attention one usually saves for a pulse on a hospital monitor. Musicians tested ribs of chords in the pit. A violin traced a line up the neck and drifted back down as if deciding whether the day deserved its best voice. Elise had arranged for the modified hazer to be inert. Its memory card was out and its power bypass dead. The conductor's podium had been cleaned and the naked grain under the lip glowed with fresh wood where tape had once clung. Officers kept to the corners where only stagehands would notice them. Elise preferred quiet pressure to uniforms. She wanted the building to think it was alone with its tricks. Camille spoke without looking away from the drape. "You have turned off every ghost you can find." "I have turned off every lamp," Elise said. "Ghosts do what they want." The orchestra settled into the slow seesaw of a tune. The conductor tapped his baton twice on the stand. The sound carried like clicks on a bone. Elise felt the tiny electric rise in the room that happens when 100 people decide to listen at the same time. The curtain moved. It was small, a breath in the velvet. Then a shape opened on the red, darker than anything a visible beam could make. A figure drawn with merciless economy falling backward over a rail. 2 seconds, not 6. An arc for a back. A line for an arm flung wide. A bar for the balcony. The shadow collapsed into red as if swallowed by the cloth. Elise did not allow herself the human reflex to look up. The modified hazer above her had no card. The lamp inside it had no power. She knew what she had seen. The curtain had learned a new word and it came at a shorter length. The conductor blinked and raised his hands again as if the thing had been a hiccup in a throat no one speaks about. The players watched their pages. Camille stared at the curtain as though it had betrayed her. "Someone is using another mouth," Camille said. Elise was already moving. She crossed behind the curtain, through the gap at the leg, into the deep red half-dark of the upstage. She looked for the second instrument, the second throat, the second trick hiding in the open. She found none. The back wall stood with its scabs of old paint and ripped staples. The ladders leaned. Coiled cables slept. A fresh hazer sat in its place like any other. Its internals were clean. The stage left and right booms held nothing but lamps that admitted their purpose honestly. She returned to the wing and signaled the conductor to stop. He lowered his hands. The silence that followed had edges. "Cut the warm-up," she said. "Everyone out of the house. We will resume in an hour." There were grumbles. There are always grumbles. Camille's voice carried them toward the stage door as neatly as a broom sweeps sawdust. In the sudden quiet, Elise stood center and looked at the curtain not as a wall but as a memory. The 2-second shadow had left behind nothing the eye could see. The velvet looked as it always had, which was to say like something that would never forgive. She broke that quiet herself by calling her evidence team. "Remove the main drape," she said. "Tag it and crate it. The backups go up in its place." She faced Camille. "I will sign the paper that says this was necessary in order to make the gala safe. You can show it to Lucien if he wants to hang me beside the portrait of his first lead." Camille nodded once and went to fetch the fly crew. Elise waited at the proscenium while the men and women who knew how to carry weight in both hands came with their gloves and their economy of motion. They dropped the trim and caught the red mountain as it came, bodying it like a friend who has fainted at a party. They rolled it into the crate that waited like a coffin for a king. They hauled up the backup crimson, newer, slightly brighter, its pile less crushed by years of applause. The room grew strangely naked for the seconds when there was no red at all and the black behind it stared like a blunt truth. When the backup was in place, Elise took the house to black and ran her ultraviolet wand along the bottom edge, the corners, the hem. The new curtain showed what a clean conscience looks like. No blur, no stun, no shy glow of chemical ambition. She breathed for the first time in an hour as if an old strap had loosened across her ribs. She turned the ghost light on and made herself walk to the lobby to breathe street air. Cold slid down the marble in sheets. She stepped through it and out to the square. Across the way, the poster case showed the smiling faces of actors who had no idea which parts they played in the offstage work. The city was a gray plate set out under a sky that promised either rain or nothing at all. Her phone buzzed. It was not her work number. The cheap handset she used for tips and unpleasant promises shook in her pocket. She checked the screen. Unknown. She answered. A photograph arrived before the voice. It was a shot of the new curtain, easy to tell by the brighter hue and the fresh pleat along the hem. On the red, faint as breath on glass, a dark imprint lay like a bruise that had not decided whether to bloom. It was the same falling figure, the same bar of balcony, the same arc toward the floor. The text followed. You can swap the skin. The blood knows. Elise looked back through the doors into the house and then down at the screen. The angle in the picture had been taken from the stage right wing. The ghost light glowed in the lower left corner. The imprint was not from her wand. It lay exactly where the shadow had opened minutes ago, as if the cloth remembered an order that had only been whispered. She called Camille. Where is the spare crimson stored when it is not on the pipe? She said. Wardrobe keeps it, Camille said. The shop across the alley. On rails with the big coats and the festival skirts and that blue velvet that never fit our stage. Who has keys? Elise said. Master carpenter. Wardrobe mistress. Me. Lucien, though his key ring is for show more than use. 2 stagehands who sleep there sometimes when the metro folds early. Hugo had one. Came back to me after the river. Elise let the words sit. Hugo had helped hang the spare curtain. Now the spare had been taught the same secret. This was either a hand inside the crew or a hand that could come and go through the wardrobe shop as if it were a private parlor. A chemical wash could be applied when no one watched. A stencil could be pressed and wiped. The cloth would answer to ultraviolet even if no one wanted it to. She returned to the stage and pulled the wardrobe mistress from a rack of velvet that smelled of cedar. The woman had fingers stained with dye that does not care about soap. Elise asked for the log of who had entered the shop in the past week. The log was clean and useless, which meant it was honest or it was lazy. She asked who had asked about cleaning the backup curtain. Everyone asks, the mistress said. They think velvet behaves like shirts. It does not. If you wash it, it remembers. Did Celeste Moreau come through here? Elise said. She came with a bag and a smile and the tone of a person who believes she is buying time with compliments. The mistress said. She asked to borrow a steamer. She borrowed it. Came back smelling like perfume and metal. Elise set that aside for later. She took a sample from the lower hem of the new curtain where the faint imprint had lain in the photo. Under her wand, the hem now showed nothing, which was as frightening as a smile that hides teeth. Whatever had made the picture had not been a new coat of brightener. The imprint was a ghost of the ultraviolet itself. The fabric had been trained to take a hint, and hints are hard to arrest. She called for more officers, but quietly. She instructed the team to fit a net under the grand balcony, hidden with black scrim and thrift. She had the crew lay stunt mats like thick shadows under rows of plush that would host donors. She asked an engineer to build her a small addition to the scanner rig, a stamp that would burn a timestamp and a device identifier into any pattern that ran. A watermark no human eye would register in the house, but any camera at the right angle would catch. She had the conductor's microphone feed split so that any click under the podium would ping a recorder and a patrol tack channel at once. Camille watched her work and said, "You will leave the rig in place." Elise nodded. "I will leave it blind until the right moment. Then it will see what it is told to see, and it will tell us who spoke." Lucien appeared in the aisle with a face he might have used on a donor who had threatened to take the wine away. "You have removed our heart and replaced it with a copy," he said. "The gala is tonight. The house will notice. The house will notice that no one falls to their death by accident." Elise said. "The house will forgive the cloth if the cloth behaves." Lucien looked up at the backup crimson and made a small approving noise as if he had chosen it himself for its color. "It is brighter," he said. "The rich prefer bright to deep. Perhaps the tragedy stands out better against cheer." Elise ignored him and reviewed her list. Invite list confirmed. Seating chart copied. The conductor briefed to keep his hands honest. The podium checked for any new tape. The modified hazer closed and left to look innocent. Officers who could pass for theater people took posts where eyes would never settle for long. She left a single path for the person who could not resist a cue. When evening came, Paris shook out its coat and put on its pail. Cars idled under the balcony where donors liked to be seen in both arrivals and exits. The lobby filled with conversations that sounded like applause turned sideways. Celeste Moreau arrived in black with a metal clutch that flashed when she laughed and stopped when she did not. Maxime Durand lurked in the back of the house, his eyes prowling from lamp to lamp the way a captain counts sails. Camille stood at the stage manager's desk with both hands on the edge and her headset in place. Lucien moved through the stalls the way an owner walks through a garden that must bloom to pay the rent. Elise took a seat close to the aisle where the angle to the stage would let her see the podium, the ghost light space, the lower hem of the new curtain. Her team settled like patience into the dark. The orchestra tuned. The donors arranged themselves on the grand balcony with an instinct as old as altars. The ghost light dimmed and left only the soft lozenge of the conductor's lamp. The curtain trembled once, the small movement fabric makes when a building breathes. Elise felt the skin behind her ears tighten. She knew the trigger would not be the one she had already found. A mind that enjoys deception collects duplicates. Celeste stepped from the aisle to the edge of the stage with a smile borrowed from the world of awards. She raised one hand as if greeting an old friend and said she had a few words before the evening. Her free hand slid across the underside of the podium where no one who was not looking for it would look. It passed over bare wood and then hovered above it as if savoring a last certainty. The red on the pipe deepened at its center. A falling figure bloomed, as if stitched in by speed. Close on the cloth, a pale signature flickered, a watermark only the prepared camera could catch. The conductor flinched and backed away as if the podium had exhaled something it had never meant to keep. In Elisa's ear, the police band clicked twice. She stood. The officers did not yet move. They waited for the second click that said the scanner had accepted a command from a particular device with a particular address. In that heartbeat, the donors on the balcony leaned forward as one, hungry for anything expensive that might happen in front of them. The house held its breath exactly as it had in the 3 recordings. Elise kept her eyes on Celeste's hand and the little flash of metal at the hinge of her clutch. The evening had started to speak in the language Elise understood best. A trap only works when it is an answer to a question someone else cannot stop asking. Part 7, reading the console like a diary. Earlier that afternoon, when the house still smelled of dust and coffee, Elise Marchand asked Camille Noir for the soundboard recordings and the lighting console backups from every night the curtain had spoken. She wanted the stage to tell on itself in the way machines do when they are forced to keep a diary they do not know they are writing. They sat together at the stage manager's desk. The desk was a ship's bridge of switches and scribbles. Elise wore headphones and listened through the slow tide of pre-show noise. Chair legs, coughs, the low shuffle of an orchestra making peace with pitch. She marked the minute before each shadow. She marked the second itself. She marked what followed because a second rarely travels alone. The lighting console log was pristine on the surface. No strange cue at the moments the curtain darkened. No fixture ever took a level it had not been given. Whoever planned the trick had known not to touch the board that every hand expects to leave fingerprints. But the audio told a simpler truth. At 6 seconds before the hush broke, the conductor's microphone clicked once. A small metal nick in an otherwise smooth line. The same click lived at the other nights too, each at the exact beat where the red cloth had behaved like a scream. Elise backed up the audio and listened to the entire rehearsal of the second night. She listened past the tune, past the chatter, past a joke the third horn told that did not land. She listened to the conductor mutter about tempo. She heard him set his pencil down. She heard the click again, bright as a pin. She set a marker. She kept going, and there, tucked deep in the feed, a whisper of radio talk rode the noise floor for half a breath and died. She opened the small device she had taken from under the podium earlier that week. It wore no brand, and yet it had a voice of its own. In a drawer on Maxime Durand's bench, She had found a family of similar shells. They were housings for foot switches he built to save his ankles from the distances between boards. The antenna socket and the shape of the tiny switch were match for match. The solder work inside was clean and cold. Maxime's pride lived in neat lines and right angles even when his life did not. She asked Camille for a list of who had access to the podium on the 3 nights. Camille shook her head at the philosophical part of the request. Everyone had access to the podium, which is to say no one respected its border. The conductor, of course. The assistant conductor. The production assistants who wiped the wood and straightened the lamp. The stagehands who rearranged chairs to suit the brass and soothe the strings. The resident designer who adjusted angles the way other men adjust moods. Visitors who should not have been allowed and yet arrived with a smile and a reason. Lucien, who touched everything and called it blessing. Elise took Maxime's laptop into evidence with a polite note that sounded like a thank you and an order at once. The device held drafts of the 4 figures in a folder named with a joke about shadows that would impress no one when read aloud in court. The drafts told a lineage. The strangling, first, as a sketch that grew sharper over 6 versions until the curve of the arm and the tilt of the head hit a cruel elegance. The slash across the ribs began as a wandering line and found discipline after Maxime traced the path against a mannequin in the props loft. The dragging gained short dashes at the heels as if the artist wanted the cotton in the audience's mouths. The fall began as a simple arc and then took a kink at the middle when Maxime raised the balcony rail in his model. He left behind notes in the file properties, little complaints to himself in the margins the system pretends are not speech. Try a wider sweep. Shorten to 6 seconds. Tighten the wrist. Keep it simple enough that a drunk can understand it and a sober donor will feel clever. Elise printed the revision pages and slid them under a paperweight on her desk. She wrote beside them in her firm hand that wanted everything to stand at attention. The files belonged to Maxime. The machine that whispered to the curtain did not need the main console. The conductor's microphone heard a click at the beginning of each shadow. The power bypass avoids any log. So the trick walks around the places that remember. She returned to the theater and placed a small flat recorder inside the podium where the earlier trigger had lived. This one would not speak. It would listen. Anything pressed against the wood would become a tiny confession. She fitted a second recorder to the hazer shell to capture any hiss the scanning head made even when it was meant to be quiet. She tested the stamp she had ordered. A watermark drawn in a pale band at the edge of the beam, invisible to eyes hungry for drama, bright to a camera tuned for it. She positioned 2 cameras to catch the red field from angles the audience would call unflattering. Truth has few flattering angles. By late afternoon, she had finished her listening and her laying of wire. She walked once more through the building and met each possible hand where it lived. She found Maxime under the balcony choosing a dappled look for the intermission speech. He did not flinch when she stood beside him. "Your laptop holds the drawings," Elise said. "I told you it would," he said. "A stage is a place to show your work." He smiled without humor. "If you mean to shoot me with my own pencil, at least let me choose the lead. The antenna on the trigger matches your foot switches," she said. He looked past her toward the stage as if a phantom cue had lit the boards. "Everyone in this house has learned to borrow what works," he said. "The question you want is whose thumb it was, not who soldered the wire." She left him with his lamps. She found Lucien on the grand stair, adjusting a banner so it kissed the newel post at the exact angle he liked. He met her eyes with pleasure and challenge braided together. "If your trap fails," he said, "you will have taught the city to yawn at us. If your trap works, they will come for blood and stay for wine. Either way, the valiant eats." "If my trap works," Elise said, "the valiant eats without biting. If it fails, I will close your kitchen." He bowed as if she had paid him a compliment. Men like him bow to their own reflections. She found Celeste Moreau in the aisle speaking to a donor about a private tour that would happen the day after never. The metal hinge of her clutch winked. She raised her eyes to Elise with a warmth that held ice in the center. "You will be careful where you point that gaze, Inspector," she said. "It leaves a mark, and I sell faces." "I am pointing my gaze at hands," Elise said. "Faces come later." Night arrived with appetite. The gala began. Now, as the falling shadow opened for 2 bright heartbeats and shut again, Elise's preparations stepped out of hiding. The watermark stamped into the darkness like a signature written with lemon on an old letter. The split of the microphone feed sent the podium's small confession to the recorder and to the patrol channel. Somewhere in the house, an officer saw a tiny code appear on his screen, the identity string of a device that had whispered an order to the scanner. Elise did not rise when the first shadow fell. She kept her body still and let others stand. She watched hands instead. Celeste's fingers, elegant and deliberate, still near the underside of the podium. The conductor's hands, lifted in apology. Maxime's hands, clamped on the back of a seat 2 rows behind her, his knuckles white as if he held himself in place by force. Lucien's hands, open and generous as he turned toward the balcony to absorb the murmur like a plant taking light. The second heartbeat came, and with it the ping that said the scanner had received the order from a radio address the watermark now carried inside the image itself. The officer 2 seats down touched his ear and did not move. The trap was meant to hold, not to startle. Elise stood then, slow and ordinary, and walked down the aisle to the lip of the stage. Her voice did not need to be loud. She had the microphone's quiet dignity and the particular silence that falls when money senses consequence. "We will pause," she said, "for safety." Celeste smiled as if pause were another word for thoughtfulness. She stepped back from the podium, still speaking pleasantries to the room. Her clutch swung lightly. The metal hinge caught the ghost light's glow and returned it. Elise did not reach for her. Not yet. She went instead to the edge of the pit and lifted the conductor's lamp with 2 fingers as if checking whether its shade had been tightened. She looked under the podium and let her hand rest against the wood. The tiny flat recorder taped inside hummed with warmth. She slid it free without display and closed her palm. She turned to Camille at the stage manager's desk. "Play the house music," she said. "Bring the lights up to a gentle level. Ask the audience to take 10 minutes to admire our plasterwork. Then lock the doors." Camille did not ask why. She began to do the work that felt like breathing. Elise stepped off the stage and moved down the aisle as if to speak to an usher. The officers moved as planned, soft and without theater, toward a black door marked with a simple number. The quick path to a corridor where a person could be asked to open a clutch and explain the shine inside. Maxime did not move. Lucien leaned over the rail and began to apologize to the balcony in a voice that begged for sympathy and expected applause. In the narrow corridor behind the door, a small squad waited for Elise with the patience of people who have practiced hiding their excitement. She brought them the recorder. She told them what the watermark would say. She told them whose bag to ask for first and whose laptop to take second. She told them to look for a second trigger, because minds that flirt with risk never travel without twins. Then she returned to the stage and stood with Camille, watching the red curtain in the safe light. The cloth looked new again, but the diary of the day had already been written. It lay in logs, in stamps, in clicks, in the tender places where hands touch wood without thinking and leave behind heat that remembers. The question remained the same, taut as wire. Maxime drew the shadows. Someone chose the bodies. In 10 minutes, the first hand would lead them to the second, or surprise them by being both. Part 8: The Blood That Is Not There. By the time the gala crowd drifted into plasterwork and champagne, the lab reports Elise Marchand had ordered were ready to speak. She read them at the stage manager desk while the house music washed the room like a polite tide. Science had a way of sounding humble and ruthless at once. The scarf that had been pulled tight against Etienne Moreau's throat showed more than wool and perfume. In the weave, caught like soot in a book's gutter, lay carbon black in particles too regular to be street filth. The grain analysis matched the same family as the black Elise had lifted from the curtain's hem. Gum arabic sat in the fibers as a brittle halo, a faint glue that did not belong to scarf or skin. Under near ultraviolet, the scarf showed a thin aura along one edge, the peculiar false whiteness of optical brightener, as if the cloth had kissed a surface washed to answer light the eye cannot see. In Isabelle Duval's apartment, a paper lampshade that the cleaner had forgotten to replace told the same low song. The outside looked like paper and dust. The inside, when coaxed by the right lamp, sang back with the pale boast of brightener. Along the lower rim, a faint black smear had dried. Gum crystals sat there, tiny and unlovely. Isabel had leaned into the red curtain 2 days before she died, laughing into a telephone while Lucien Artois promised a future he had not earned. Her lamp at home had carried away the evidence the stage had left on her coat. She had not known to keep her hands from her face that night. No one knows to keep their hands from their own life. Hugo Vasseur, lifted river cold from the Seine, brought the theater with him in stubborn details. His boots held crystals that were not salt. Under a scope they broke into the same gum Elise had found on the velvet nap. The tread carried red fibers the river had not washed loose. Under the laces a fine dust lived, a blend of saw, burlap, and dye that belonged to wings and lofts, not keys and bars. Hugo had helped hang the spare crimson the day he died. The curtain shed a little of itself onto him. The wash shed more. He walked the city with the theater on his feet and never knew the stage had marked him like a stamp. Elise stood at the rail and let the facts settle into the shape her mind had been carving since she first watched the curtain behave as if it had a will. The 3 dead were not chosen because of their schedules alone. They had been marked by the stage itself. They had touched the prepped cloth. They had carried away the invisible part of the trick. Someone had selected them after the contact and matched the shadow to the act, making a prophecy out of a plan. She crossed the house to Camille Noir, who kept one ear on the comms and one eye on the donors. Camille did not look away from the faders when she spoke. "Tell me something I can use," she said. "The victims all wore the theater home on their skin or in their rooms," Elise said. "Carbon black, gum Arabic, optical brightener. Your curtain is not a witness. It is a list. Whoever made the list did not need ink. They only needed to wait by the door and watch who could not keep from touching the red." Camille's mouth thinned. "People touch it because they love it," she said, "or because they think it will love them back. It loved them enough to get them killed," Elise said, and heard the hardness in her own voice. She left Camille and walked the perimeter of the stage. She knelt at the lower left corner where stage hands take their grip out of habit. She pictured a human chain of contact. An eager critic, ignoring a warning, pressed fingers into velvet for a photograph that would help a cruel sentence land. A wealthy patron, unafraid to lean her shoulder into cloth as if proximity could be owned, carried home a smear on a sleeve and a sheen on her hair. A stagehand who spoke of safety and did not pull his palm away from the work fast enough walked the river paths with gum on his boots. Each one was now a name in a file and a shadow rehearsed on red. The forensic tech came to her at the wing with a small box and the careful face of a person who knows that truth breaks things and mends them depending on how it is used. "The audio stamp is clean," he said. "The watermark in the falling figure carries a device signature. We will have a match by the time the donors finish their second glass." The podium recorder caught a press and a release. There is a click, a microsecond of carrier tone, and a dead spot that shows a tiny transmitter was close to the wood. Elise nodded. "Keep it quiet. We will use it when the room has calmed." She spent the next 10 minutes in motion. In the wardrobe shop, she found the steamer Celeste had borrowed. Its reservoir smelled faintly not only of distilled water and perfume, but of something chalky and bitter that the lab would name in an hour. In the carpenter bay, she found a rack of stencils for lettering and one with an odd negative curve that matched the arc in Maxime's fall drawing a little too well. In Maxime's world of light, a curve is a sentence. In Celeste's world of attention, a curve is a net. In Lucien's world of survival, a curve is the edge of the cliff he means to call stagecraft. She sat for a moment in the front row and called up the autopsy photographs on her tablet, ignoring the tug of ritual that says you should not look at such things in a theater. Etienne's scarf showed the tiny grains where air had tried to sandpaper death away and failed. Isabel's wound spoke of a hand that had practiced elsewhere and brought its practice to her room when no one watched. Hugo's knuckles had a scrape that looked like a goodbye to a rough edge on a ladder. The red curtain hung quiet as a closed mouth. It had been taught how to remember. It answered only when the right light called it by its new name. The trick was a loop now, a cycle in which a person was brushed, a shadow performed, and a life was taken. The theater pretended to prophesy while someone in the city arranged the present to meet the picture. Elise thought of the words Celeste had put in a message to Lucien. Shadow before deed. Twitter after. We trend or we die. That was not prophecy. That was an instruction. She turned the thought into action. She sent a photo of the scarf micrograph to the lab with a request to run it against the particles taken from the main drape. She sent the lampshade smear for a tighter match. She requested a chemical profile for the gum in Hugo's boot dust and the gum on the curtain, down to supplier if possible. The boutique orders would fold into that match like handwriting a child cannot disguise. Then she wrote a single sentence in her notebook, the sentence that made the rest of the case stand up and walk. The curtain is a list. The hand that compiled it stands inside the house or walks through it as if it belongs. She closed the book and looked up into the box where Lucien liked to stand with his small kingdom at his back. Empty for now. In the stalls Maxime sat rigid. A man braced for a verdict he hoped would be about art and feared would be about harm. In the aisle Celeste smiled at someone and flexed her fingers against the metal hinge of her clutch, testing it like a lover. In the wings Camille watched the time. Elise rose. The gala could pretend to be about money and grace, but the night had already chosen its work. The next step was simple and sharp. Prove in public what the lab had proved in private. Catch the trigger at the moment vanity demanded it be pressed. Then follow the money to the order and the body to the blade. She walked to the stage manager desk. Camille, she said, when we bring the house back, we will give them a speech. Then we will let the curtain breathe once more. And when it does, it will tell us who wrote its lines. Part 9, The Agent Who Loves a Scandal. Elise Marchand asked for a quiet office and a pot of strong coffee. The Theatre Valiant had a room with thin walls and a desk scarred by decades of pens that had not forgiven their work. She opened a file on her tablet and read a conversation that had not expected daylight. Celeste Moreau to Lucien Artois. Shadow before deed. Twitter after. We trend or we die. The sentence had rhythm. It also had teeth. Lucien's reply lived a few lines below. We hint. We do not harm. Celeste's answer arrived 3 minutes later. Stories need blood. The message came with a link to a private folder of promotional cuts and a proposal for a campaign that promised momentum at any cost. She had typed at midnight and attached an image of the red curtain as if it were a signature. Elise scrolled. The thread moved from restless ideas to logistics. A package of optical brightener, 2 kilos of carbon black, gum Arabic in bulk. A delivery address that belonged to Celeste's boutique. A second address that belonged to the wardrobe shop. Phrases that read like choreography. A wash on cloth. A rehearsal of a sign. A hush that cameras love. She closed the thread and opened a second file. The term sheet from a streaming platform lay there like a wedge. If the Valiant could generate viral moments from live performance, sponsors would pay for a series of short features shot in the house. The money scaled with engagement. A formula sat in a neat box. It treated attention like a chemical that could be weighed. At the bottom, a clause made Elise stop. The content must include an escalating arc that blurs the boundary between theater and city. She read it twice. The sentence came wrapped in glossy language about innovation and courage. It did not name harm. It did not have to. She reached for the next folder. A bank analysis. Maxime Durand had received 3 envelopes of cash in the past month. Each deposit matched a withdrawal from an account that belonged to Celeste's company. The numbers were small enough to look like favors and large enough to matter to a man who paid rent in hope. Elise felt the line from text to money to cloth settle into something that could carry weight in court. She stood and walked the corridor to the boutique across the alley. The bell over the door made a sweet sound. Celeste stood at a glass case arranging compacts in a gradient that would photograph well. "Inspector," she said, as if it were a perfume title. "You look like you have found a story." "I have found a contract," Elise said. "It pays if your theater becomes a headline. I have found purchases in your name. They turn a red curtain into a surface that begs for invisible light. I have found cash that left your hand and landed in Maxime's pocket. I have found messages where you asked for blood." Celeste smiled the way a person smiles when another person has arrived at the right house but the wrong door. "You strip the context out and leave only the scandal," she said. "Marketing is the work of dressing risk in a tuxedo. I dressed a curtain. I hired a designer. You will not find a knife in my desk. You may not have needed one, Elise said. You had a gallery of marks and a trigger within reach. You had a man beside you who could be paid for art and ignore what it bought. Celeste rested her fingertips on the glass. They were steady. The city is bored, she said. I give it appetite. The donors want to feel dangerous without paying the real price. I sell them that feeling. You can condemn me for knowing my market. You cannot lock me up for buying gum. Elise kept her voice gentle. Where were you on the 3 nights the curtain spoke? On the aisle, Celeste said, in a dress that fit the light, near enough to the podium to whisper to the conductor that he looked noble in silhouette, far enough away that I could see the red at the center as if it were a heart under a hand. Does that help your sketch? It does, Elise said, and left the shop with nothing on paper and everything she needed to set weight on her trap. Back at the theater she sat again with Lucien. He held a sheaf of papers like a priest with a liturgy. He read the room the way men like him always do, with half his mind on the words and half on how his face would look in the memory of others. You knew about the wash, Elise said. You hid purchases in petty cash. You asked for miracles. You told yourself they were only tricks. Lucien spread his hands. I told an artist to make the cloth breathe, he said. You have to pull something that looks like danger into the room or else everyone falls asleep. If I had said the word blood, if I had bought knives, then I would sit where you asked me to sit. I paid for a hush. Others put screams inside it. Who, Elise said. He looked past her at the stage. Do you mean the designer who draws darkness like a saint draws lines? Or the agent who can make the world watch a man drown in a spoon of water? Or the city that has wanted us dead for 10 years and now attends our every rumor? Choose a villain that suits your story. The house is innocent. It only repeats what people bring it. Elise stood and walked away from the charm before it fogged her judgment. At the stage manager's desk, she asked Camille to bring her the incoming deliveries log. A line from 3 days earlier ran a finger across the page. A crate. Cleaning supplies. Signed for by a temp. The handwriting was tidy and bland. The name did not match any schedule. She took the crate to a bench in the carpentry bay and opened it. Bottles of brightener. Carbon in sealed bags. Gum in brown paper. A smaller box at the bottom with a stenciled mark that said it once held a radio receiver. The box was empty. The cardboard smelled faintly of metal and heat. The label bore an address to a drop service. Celeste had nothing to do with it on paper. Paper is good at forgetting. Devices are not. Elise took the conductor's microphone feed again and listened to the 4 seconds before each click. Twice she heard a soft tremor that did not belong to an orchestra at rest. Tiny burst. A carrier tone coming up and sliding back down. She sent the clip to the tech with a note. Match this to the address in our watermark if you can. Then she walked to Maxime. He stood on the grand stair with a roll of gaffer tape in his hand and a look that did not belong on a young man's face. She held up the bank analysis without handing it over. Tell me about the envelopes, she said. He closed his eyes and opened them. Rent, he said. A new board so the old one would not fry mid-show. A promise that if the house survived the winter I would design a piece that only light can do. I told myself I was paid for speed. Then I told myself I was paid for silence. Then I stopped telling myself anything because the work did not change. Did you know the shadows matched the deaths? She said. Not the order. The method. He swallowed. Not at first. I thought the street was copying us. We are arrogant. We think everyone copies us. When Hugo went into the river, I went home and took the scanner apart in my head. I could not take it apart at the house. The house had grown around it like a tree around a nail. Elise watched his hands. They trembled and then went still. He was not innocent. He was not the one who had chosen a throat and a blade. He had carried the tool and believed in odorless magic. He would answer for that. He was not the hand that wrote a list of people whose touch would cost them their lives. The donors returned to their seats. The air changed. It did not grow heavy. It grew intent. Elise signaled the officers at the doors to stand ready. She read again the line in the sponsorship term sheet about blurring the boundary between theater and city. She turned it over with a blunt pencil and wrote beneath it in her own script. "This is conspiracy dressed as art." She walked to the podium and bent as if to adjust the lamp. She left under the lip a new recorder even smaller than the first. It would hear any tap. It would taste radio breath. It would sit where Celeste's hand had hovered that afternoon. Then she stood and waited. Celeste arrived for her little speech. She did not need a microphone to be heard. Attention followed her as if it were a trained dog. She thanked donors by name and praised the valiant as if it were a person who had survived a shipwreck. Her clutch hung at her wrist. The hinge flashed when she moved. Lucien stood 3 rows back and looked like a man who has found a way to make disaster pay him for his time. Maxime hung in the back of the house and clung to the dark. Elise scanned the balcony. The net lay hidden beneath velvet. The mats waited below. Officers sat like patient strangers. The ghost light dimmed by half and held steady. The new drape's color looked almost innocent. The floor under Elise's feet hummed with the old electricity of a full audience. She felt in her pocket the printed messages. Shadow before deed. We trend or we die. Her trap did not need outrage. It needed timing. It needed the human weakness that insists on finishing the trick once it has begun. Celeste set her hand under the podium and smiled at the room. The hand stilled for a fraction. The old click arrived. The red deepened. The falling figure opened and closed again. At the lower edge of the image, the watermark burned in a spectrum only a camera could love. The patrol channel pinged. Elise raised a hand to Camille. Lights to a soft house level. Music at a polite murmur. Doors closed. She walked downstage without haste. "We will pause," she said. "There is a safety concern." She did not look at Celeste when she said it. She looked at the clutch. The hinge had a hairline smear near the notch. Black tucked inside silver. Gum dried to a gloss. She looked at Lucien. He had turned his face to the balcony to absorb blame and return it as charm. She looked at Maxime. His eyes were on the red field, as if he needed to know that the drawing he loved had been used to write a confession. The house waited. Elise felt the case settle into its next shape. Celeste had motive and a method. She had bought the wash and paid the engineer. She had a term sheet that rewarded danger disguised as art. Now Elise needed the trigger in her hand or the knife in her past. She would take either. In 10 minutes, a door down the narrow hall would close behind a metal clutch, and someone would explain how a whisper became a fall. Part 10, Gala Night, Ghost Light. Elise Marchand stood at the lip of the stage and watched the house resettle. A sea of silk and expectation. The chandelier hummed like a hive. The ghost light, dimmed but faithful, held its small circle near center. The backup crimson drape waited as if it had been born to a simpler life and had only now learned what a city can ask of cloth. Camille Noir spoke in the headset with the practiced patience of a pilot landing in wind. "House to half. Hold the door. We resume on my call." Elise answered without touching her own earpiece. "Let them believe we are careful, not afraid." She crossed to the conductor's podium. The lamp cast a mild oval across the wood. She rested her hand under the lip where the recorder lay hidden and felt it warm and alive. Somewhere in the dark, 2 small cameras watched the red field from the angles that made truth sharp. Under the grand balcony, nets lay folded into shadows. In the aisles, thin as rumor, officers held their stations without telegraphing intent. Celeste Moreau stood near the podium and smiled at money as if it were a lover who forgave everything. Lucien Artois loitered 3 rows back, shoulders open, the posture of a man who greets applause before anyone has clapped. Maxime Durand leaned against a column in the dark, not trusting himself to sit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Celeste said, her voice feathered just enough to float, "we are grateful for your presence. The valiant has survived on courage and kindness. Tonight it survives on your attention." Elise looked at her hands and not at her face. The clutch hung from a thin chain at Celeste's wrist. The hinge caught light and returned it. In the hinge, a hairline smear had dried to a dull shine, black inside silver, gum sealed to metal. Celeste lifted her free hand in a gesture that promised only gratitude. Her other hand drifted, casual and sure, to the underside of the podium where any musician would rest a thumb before playing. Elise watched the fingers pause, as if locating a remembered outline on bare wood, then press. A heartbeat later, the red field deepened. A shape bloomed and fell away. It was the same figure, drawn with merciless economy, tumbling backward over a bar. The watermark Elise had grafted to the scanner burned in the corner, invisible to eyes that expected romance, bright to the cameras that had been told what to see. In Elise's pocket, the patrol channel clicked. A code unspooled on a small screen in an officer's hand 2 rows from the aisle. The device identity matched the address etched into the watermark. The whisper that woke the scanner had come from a transmitter within arm's length of the podium. Elise lifted a hand toward Camille. House to soft. Music at a murmur. Doors closed. She stepped downstage. Her voice filled the space without force. We will pause. There is a safety concern. The donors obeyed with the eagerness of people who are grateful to be managed. The orchestra looked to the conductor, who looked to Elise and then put his baton down as if it had grown heavy. Lucien smiled up at the balcony, palms raised in sympathy, a man soothing an animal that belongs to him. Maxime did not move at all. Elise did not confront Celeste at the microphone. Spectacle would be a gift. She turned instead to the nearest usher and asked, as if about a mislaid program, "Will you assist me a moment?" Then she crossed to the black door at the side aisle and held it for Celeste without meeting her gaze. In the narrow corridor beyond, the air changed. It smelled of dust and paint and the domestic fear that lives in old theaters even when the house laughs. 2 officers stood in shadow, not blocking the passage, simply becoming part of it. Elise walked until the whisper of the audience died behind a bend. Then she turned. "Ms. Moreau," she said, "I need to see your clutch." Celeste did not hesitate. She set the metal thing on her palm like an offering. She had rehearsed this in a mirror. She could play innocence in a close-up. Elise took the clutch and weighed it, heavier than it should have been. She eased open the hinge, methodical, a jeweler at a bench. Inside, velvet lining. A phone, narrow and bright. A second device, smaller, darker, nested into a false pocket. No brand. A fingertip switch. A socket for a short antenna. Elise lifted it with 2 fingers. "Do you know what this is?" "A battery," Celeste said. "For my phone." "It is a transmitter," Elise said, plain as water. "It whispers a private command." It told our hidden lamp to speak. When it spoke, our stamp wrote your device's address into the shadow. The podium carried a recorder that heard your thumb press. This is not marketing. This is control. Celeste smiled without teeth. You are mistaking the choreography for the dance. Elise handed the transmitter to an officer. Bag it. Then she took the phone and woke it. The screen opened on a familiar design, the sort of application a hobbyist would use to trigger lights in a home or an amateur disc jockey would use to flash a bar into thinking it is a club. There were 4 buttons. Strangle, / drag, fall. Recent activity glowed under them. 1 minute ago, fall. 6 days ago, drag. 9 days ago, / 12 days ago, strangle. Elise felt the click of the case aligning itself. She did not savor it. She had learned not to. She returned the phone to the clutch and closed the hinge. Then she looked at the woman. You will come with us now. Celeste did not ask where. She studied Elise's face as if shopping for a tone. Then she laughed, a small, clean sound that ruined nothing in the air. Of course, she said. The city loves a woman in handcuffs. Do you intend to carry me through the lobby? We will not perform you, Elise said. She nodded to the officers and they began to walk Celeste down the corridor that led to the service exit, the path where music stands and pride leave when they have done their duty. Halfway to the door, Celeste turned her head over her shoulder. You should ask yourself why you are so certain I am the only one who deserves this. I am not certain of that at all, Elise said. They reached the service door. Outside, the alley kept the nights damp. Car idled with its lights off. The officers guided Celeste into the back seat with the tenderness of practice. The door shut with a thud that made the alley seem to exhale. Elise stayed in the corridor for a beat. The hush after an arrest is a particular silence. It is not relief. It is space where the mind lays out the next work. She turned and walked back toward the stage. Camille met her at the wings. The headset was crooked on her hair. Her eyes were level. "Well," she said. "We have the trigger," Elise said. "We have the device identity stamped onto the image on cue. We have the press and release under the podium. We have messages where she asks for blood, deliveries in her name, cash to Maxime. We have enough to hold her while we make the rest of the case stand upright." Camille glanced toward the house. "And the rest?" Elise looked past her to the red field. The cloth had resumed the passive innocence that drives men to poetry. Lucien stood on the aisle greeting a donor whose face had learned how to look concerned without losing its gloss. Maxime remained in the dark, not trusting the light with his posture. "Bring the house up," Elise said. "Make it clear. No more shadows tonight without permission." Camille lifted her hand. "House to full. Thank you for your patience. We resume." Elise stepped into the aisle. Lucien saw her and performed grief. He walked toward her with the open palms of a man at a funeral who expects to be photogenic. "Inspector," he said, "the room is frightened. Tell me whom to blame." "You hired a designer to make the curtain breathe," Elise said. "You paid him off the books. You chose a marketer who believed consequence is an ingredient. You accepted a sponsorship that rewarded blurring the boundary between this stage and the city. You call that innovation. The law calls it something colder." Lucien's face tightened around the eyes and then smoothed, a man adjusting lighting on his own features. "You will find," he said softly, "that the city wants its theaters to be wicked and its directors to be saints. We can be neither. We can only be useful." "You are right about the city," Elise said, "but the rope that was pulled is not metaphor." She left him with that and crossed to the back of the house where Maxime stood. He looked like a man who had been asked to carry a weight that does not roll. She held up a hand, palm outward, a pause meant to allow him to keep his footing. "The transmitter in Celeste's clutch is the mouth that whispered to your scanner," Elise said. "Your drawings became more than drawings when she pressed. Your knowledge became a weapon when you hid it inside another machine. You will come with me after the performance and answer for the bypass. If you are as clever as you think, you will help me make the rest of this safe." Maxime nodded once. His voice came as if he had bitten it first. "I will show you every wire," he said. "I will label them with a pen even a fool can read. I will testify to every screw that did not belong." "Good," Elise said. "If you are lucky, you will learn that recklessness is not courage and that courage sometimes is this, staying to name what you built." On stage, musicians retook their chairs. The conductor lifted his baton with the dignity of a man who knows too well that timing is a religion. The house eased its breath back into the ritual of listening. Elise remained in the aisle until the first notes rose. Then she walked to the stage manager's desk where Camille stood as steady as steel. "We will run the stamp once more," Elise said, "but not for the audience. After the final applause, we will close the house and make the machine confess again under proper light. We will pull the card, list the files, log the marks. We will make a map of lies." Camille tilted her head. "And Lucien? He will sit in a small room with paper and learn his part," Elise said. "He does not have to press a switch to own the current that runs through his house." She looked up at the grand balcony and the donors placed there like an arrangement of candles. The net hung where they could not see it. The mats waited below for a disaster that would not come tonight. The red curtain, which had been taught to accept a new kind of speech, hung in silence. She felt the theater's old pulse, the steady beat that lives in wood and rope when people have made a bargain with darkness and kept it. In the alley, a car pulled away, carrying a woman who believed that attention is proof of heaven. In the house, a director smiled at money and at fate. In the shadows, a designer faced the line where craft meets harm. Elise stood between them with a pen and a patient anger. The night had delivered one confession. It would deliver two more or it would lose the right to call itself orderly. She placed a hand for a moment on the ghost light pole, as if grounding herself. The bulb hummed, a small, stubborn sun. Then she stepped back, let the music do what music does, and wrote on a card the words she would speak in the morning when the trap's echo became a charge. Arrest Celeste Moreau for solicitation of murder, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. Detain Maxime Durand for reckless endangerment, accessory to tampering, and cooperation pending. Summon Lucien Artois for questioning on fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy. She tucked the card into her pocket. The orchestra climbed, the sound full of a human hope that had nothing to do with blood. The curtain would fall when the music was done, and for once it would mean only that a story had ended in the proper place. Part 11. Interrogations. Auteur, engineer, publicist. The interview room in the precinct was the color of smoke and the size of a doubt. Elise Marchand preferred it that way. It spared people the drama of grandeur. She began with Celeste Moreau because momentum belongs to the person who opened the last door. Celeste sat as if for a portrait. Her wrists were free. Her voice was careful. A lawyer waited in the corridor like weather that could change. "You have found a transmitter in my bag," she said. "You have found little words in my messages. You will say story and mean crime." Elise set the items on the table one by one. The transmitter, bagged. The phone, locked. Photographs of the watermark stamped into the falling figure. A printout of the device address that lived inside that mark. The tiny recorder from the podium whose waveform showed press, hold, release. "The curtain answered your hand," Elise said. "This is not metaphor." Celeste studied the photographs. The need to admire images was her profession and her habit. "The long game helps no one," she said finally. "A dead critic hurts only in the morning. A dead patron makes room for a patron who is not timid. A dead stagehand becomes a story the city pretends to mourn while it buys tickets to survive its grief. I did not put my fingers around a throat. I did not make a blade speak. I arranged attention. If attention broke the skin, blame the mirror." Elise made her voice plain. "You will be charged with murder by solicitation, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. You purchased the wash. You paid the engineer. You pressed the trigger. You chose victims who would echo. The city will hear the word marketing and the court will hear the word motive. The difference is thinner than you think." Celeste blinked once, slow. Then she tilted her head. "If I tell you the name of the hand that took my instruction and turned it into weight and wire, what do I receive?" "A colder room later and a warmer one now," Elise said. "The truth's only gift is order. Speak and the order changes shape." Celeste smiled without pleasure. "The bodyguard," she said. "You have seen him near me and thought he was a shadow. His name is Remy Valade. He has the build that makes doors behave. I told him which evenings were ripe. I told him who needed to be moved off the stage of life. He chose the alley for the critic. He chose the apartment for the patron. He chose the river for the boy who made a threat sound like a promise. He will tell you he did it for the art. He did it for money and for the admiration of men who like to say they are necessary." The corridor delivered the lawyer then, crisp as a page. Celeste's tone softened like light behind a thin curtain. "We are finished for now," she said. "You have what you wanted. I will take what I can get." Elise logged the statement, watched the lawyer collect his client toward bail arguments that would try to turn spectacle into leniency, and moved to the second room. Maxime Durand waited there with a paper cup in his hands and the slouch of a man who had stood too long at the back of a house that did not forgive posture. "You built the head inside the hazer," Elise said. "You bypassed the board. You drew the 4 acts of harm. Explain to me how you thought the city would stop at the edge of the stage." Maxime stared at the cup. "I wanted the red to breathe," he said. "I wanted 6 seconds of hush that belonged to craft. I told myself the shadows were universal, old as a cave wall, violence rendered into line so we do not have to live it. Then we lived it. You cannot sand those 6 seconds out of me, Inspector. I know what I am. I made a tool and believed in the old lie that the tool is innocent." "Who paid you?" Elise said. "Cash," he said. "Envelopes from Celeste. A word from Lucien that called me bold when I needed the word paid. I took it. I told myself I was saving a house. You do not know what it feels like to hold a lamp and watch a theater survive because you made light cheap enough to afford." Elise slid the photographs of the vector files across to him. He did not touch them. He had memorized their lines the way a child memorizes the grain in his bedroom wall. You will be charged with accessory to tampering, reckless endangerment, and whatever the prosecutor can persuade a judge to love, Elise said. If you help me now, I will note it. He looked up as if that small mercy had lifted his chin. What do you need? The name Remy Vale. Elise said. What do you know of him? A pair of boots that did not squeak, Maxime said. He watched rehearsals with a gaze that was all calculation. He did not clap when actors finished a fight call. He nodded when the moves looked like they would draw blood if the timing failed. He and Celeste shared a silence people share when they count. He has a scar on his right wrist that looks like a slipped blade. That is what I know. I know how scars read. Elise wrote it down. Then she stood and left him with his paper cup and his knowledge. She moved to the third room. Lucien Artois stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, as if he owned the glass. You will sit, Elise said. He sat and smiled. You have been the beneficiary of this plan, Elise said. You hid purchases in petty cash. You knew a chemical wash touched your main drape. You told your designer to breathe life into cloth and looked away when the breaths made noise. You signed a term sheet that paid you to blur a boundary. Lucien rocked back slightly. I built a stage, he said. Artists do cruel things to their own, but we do not do them to strangers. The city did that. The woman you have taken did that. The man with his talent stuck between past and future did that. I kept a house alive. You can make that into a crime if it will help you sleep. It will not help the city build any house worth the name. Elise slid the term sheet across. She slid the petty cash logs. She slid the messages where he had said we hint and she had said stories need blood. I wanted a hush, he said. I did not order a fall. If you have a word for that in your book, write it down and I will sign as if it were a program. You will be charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction, Elise said. If you insist on poetry, keep it for your cell. He held her gaze and let his charm harden. You will be adored for a week, he said quietly. Then the city will go back to starving its stages and feeding its prisons. When you want a seat at a play that matters, you will find a gate shut because you closed it yourself. Elise did not answer. She called for an officer and had Lucien return to the holding corridor where a man like him could practice a new role. She gave herself 10 minutes with the wall clock. 10 minutes to let anger loosen so judgment could breathe. Then she walked into the last room, the one without a chair. Remy Vale stood between two officers, wrists cuffed, eyes flat. He had the solidity of a door stopper and the stillness of a man who thinks he reads people by how they flinch. You have been seen near each scene, Elise said. Cameras place you within 2 blocks of Etienne Moreau's death. Within the lobby of Isabelle Duval's building an hour before she lost her blood. Near the river slip where Hugo Vasseur went into water he did not choose. Your gate says yes when the camera asks if it knows you. Your shoes say yes when the dust asks if it has met you before. Your patron has named you. Remy's mouth moved as if he had swallowed a word and decided to keep it. I keep women safe, he said. I open doors. I step between hands. If someone used my shadow for a picture, it is not my fault if the picture looks like me. Elise nodded to the technician behind the glass. The monitor showed the watermark again, enlarged to cruelty. At its edge, the small code that matched Celeste's transmitter burned. Next to it, the freeze frame of a street camera caught Remy's outline, the shoulders and the crooked right wrist. She slid a third image beside the others, the impression of a tread from Hugo's boot and a photograph of Remy's shoe in the present. The wear on the outside heel matched like a rhyme. You held the scarf, she said. You pressed the blade. You set a hand on a chest and pushed until the river made the rest of the argument. You will not speak or you will speak. Either way, the city will hear you. Choose a tone. Remy's jaw worked. Then something in the angle of Elise's face told him there was no easy version. He let his breath go out and with it some portion of certainty. She promised me 10,000 for each, he said. The critic first because he would make the most noise when he stopped. The patron because money understands only pain. The boy because someone had to show the crew that accidents still teach. I am not a philosopher. I am a man who knows where to stand and when to move. If you want remorse, you will have to find it in the people who asked for a stage. I only gave them a floor. Elise kept her voice even. Did Lucien Artois ask you? Remy shook his head. He knew, he said. He did not ask. That is the art, yes. To look left while the right hand writes. He looked left so well he convinced himself that he was blind. She took the statement down with the practice of a hand that understands how words will be weighed later. She added a note for the prosecutor about restitution and about the uglier word utility. Then she sent him to a cell and sat alone in the small room until the clock turned toward morning. Outside the corridor's window, the river pulled the city east, always toward the sea. The Theatre Valiant would open again if paper could survive truth. The red curtain waited in a crate, tagged and still. The backup hung and pretended it had only ever been cloth. Elise closed her notebook and let her pen rest. Charges queued like actors in a line, each ready for a cue. Celeste Moreau for solicitation of murder, conspiracy, tampering. Maxime Durand for accessory, reckless endangerment, evidence tampering. Lucien Artois for fraud, obstruction, conspiracy. Remy Valade for 3 counts of murder and for the ordinary brutality of being willing. Elise stood and stepped out into the hallway where morning made the linoleum shine. She thought of the ghost light standing at center, humming in the dark. She thought of a red field that had learned a new language and become a witness that did not know it was testifying. She thought of a line she would write before she slept, a line to remind herself why the work is not theater even when it uses a stage. A shadow does not predict. It is cast. People stood behind this one and reached for applause. Now they would stand in smaller rooms and reach for the word mercy. The city would keep its appetite. Elise would keep her patience. The curtain would fall. The house would breathe. And somewhere deep inside the old wood a draft would whisper through like a hand that refuses to learn. Final part, shadows on the crimson curtain. The Theatre Valiant woke to morning like a patient released from fever. Rain rinsed the square and left the posters slick and honest. Inside, the backup crimson drape hung with the stiffness of new resolve. The main curtain lay sealed in a gray crate at stage left under evidence tape that looked like a scar the house had decided to keep. Elise Marchand let herself in with the key Camille Noir had pressed into her hand and the promise that the stage would be empty. The promise held. No footsteps, no tuning notes, only the low breath of an old building keeping its own time. She crossed to the ghost light. The bulb burned with its small courage. She switched it off, then on, then off again. The circle vanished and returned and vanished once more, as if someone were blinking for the first time after a long night. Camille appeared in the wing with 2 paper cups and no makeup on her face. She handed Elise coffee and nodded at the crate. "Do we open it?" she said. "Not today," Elise said. "It has spoken enough. Let a judge read what the cloth learned to say." Camille set her cup on a road case. "The house is asking if we can put our heart back in place when this ends," she said. "They mean the red. They do not mean the people. You will put it back when it is clean and when you trust it," Elise said. "Or you will choose a new heart and teach it better habits." Camille's mouth tilted. A stage manager can teach a heart only so much. People do the rest. Elise walked downstage and looked up at the pipe where the main had lived for years. She could feel the weight of it even in its absence. There is a shape left by anything that has been here long enough. A drape, person, a mistake that grows polite and calls itself tradition. She pushed the thought aside before it warmed into philosophy. She had work to close. She brought the modified hazer from the lockup and set it on the deck. She did not power it. She opened the case and removed the scanning head with the same care someone might use to unpin a brooch from the collar of a dress they intend to keep. She set the head beside the machine and labeled each screw, each bracket, each wire with a tag so plain a child could read it. When the case went to storage, it would go as a map, not a mystery. Maxime Durand arrived with a notebook and a pen whose cap he did not trust himself to chew. He waited until Elise nodded, then crouched and pointed to the marks he had scratched into the bracket in his proud days. "Here is where I told the mirror how to look at the cloth," he said. "Here is where the beam learned to write in lines. Here is where I forgot that 6 seconds is longer than you think when a life is in the room." He looked up at Elise. I will testify to what I built. I will tell them I liked the clean feeling of it too much. I will tell them the feeling lied. Do that, Elise said. When a tool confesses, sometimes a man can follow. He wrote the names of each component and passed the notebook to Elise. She tucked it with the evidence and stood. The stage felt steadier underfoot. They found Lucien Artois waiting in the back of the house. He wore a suit that fit like an argument and a face that had been rehearsed in the dark. He did not try the smile that had cost the Valiant so much. You will reopen, he said. People will forgive because they want to be seen forgiving. You will stand in the aisle on opening night and believe the city has learned. It will not. It will ask for blood again, but quieter. It will ask for beauty to make the blood seem like style. Elise did not sit. You will sit in a court and learn that a stage is not a country exempt from law. You will pay with time and with the name you love more than breath. The house will go on because people who are not you decided it should. You can call that mercy if it helps. He looked past her at the pipe and said nothing. Some men only hear applause. Silence makes them mislay their tongues. By noon, the paperwork had run its course and left behind a trail of signatures like footprints that would not wash away. Celeste Moreau was charged and held. Remy Valade faced the long corridor with no doors. Maxime prepared to give the sort of testimony that tastes like ash. Lucien counted his friends and miscounted the ones who would stay. Elise returned to the Valiant when the light had turned thin and the city sounded like a radio between stations. She asked Camille for the stage alone. Camille granted it and left by the upstage door with a glance that said she would be 2 minutes if called, 2 hours if not. Elise stood in the center and listened. The boards still carried the old creaks in their ribs. The place where a brace had been sistered into a joist after an actor had stomped too hard one winter. Above, the catwalks drew their narrow lines across the air. The backup crimson seemed to float. She reached into her pocket and took out her notebook. She opened to a fresh page and wrote in the same neat hand that had carried her through 100 nights of rooms like this. A shadow does not predict. It is cast. Here, by people who wanted applause louder than the law. She closed the book. She stood very still. A cool drift moved from the loft down the rope nest and across the stage. The backup curtain rippled where the center fold learned again how to hang in peace. For a second, in the shallow dip of cloth and air, something might have moved. A ripple like a pulse. A shrug like memory. Elise kept her eyes on it without letting herself step closer. Fear teaches bad habits. So does superstition. The air settled. The cloth returned to its ordinary, beautiful dishonesty. It was only fabric again, strong enough to stop a person's eyes and weak enough to be cut. She switched the ghost light off and off once more. The bulb obliged. She left it burning when she walked away. In the alley, the rain had become a bright cold that made the river look new. She paused at the poster case. The heroine in her feathered hat still smiled. The gentleman still held his sword like a promise he did not understand. Elise touched the glass once, not for luck, but for the size of the work and the size of the city. Camille came to stand beside her with her hands in her pockets. We will cut new ropes, she said. We will clean the pulleys. We will teach the apprentices the old knots and the older stories about why the knots matter. We will hang a curtain that has nothing to confess. Do that, Elise said. And when someone asks to touch the red, tell them yes, but only after the show, and only with clean hands. Camille huffed a laugh. They will not listen. Some will, Elise said. Some always do. She turned toward the street and the day that had already begun to hint at night. The case would travel now, carried by clerks and fought over by people who liked to stand at tables and call that standing justice. Her part had become a list and a pen and a witness signatory line. She would sign. She would file. She would answer calls from a prosecutor who wanted to rehearse his language. Then she would sleep a few hours and wake with the same city to walk. She took one last look through the theater doors. The ghost light kept its post. The backup crimson glowed with the half-light of a cloudy afternoon. In another room, the main curtain waited like a sealed book that would be opened by hands that knew how to read damage without loving it. The house, stripped of its trick, looked like what it had always been at its best. a place where darkness behaves long enough for the living to search their pockets and find their small courage. Elise stepped out into the wet. Her phone rang once and stopped, a reporter or a friend or a stranger with a story about another place where a shadow had learned the wrong word. She let it go. She walked toward the river and the gray that promised one more hour before dusk. The Valiant breathed behind her, a little stronger for having learned that breath can be borrowed and breath can be stolen and breath can be given back. At the corner, she wrote one more line in her notebook, then closed it with the satisfaction of a drawer that shuts clean. Case closed. The theater will still make darkness behave, but not on anyone's throat. End of story. The case of the Theater Valiant closes here, a house where performance and murder shared the same stage, and applause became a kind of absolution. Detective Elise Marchand reminded us that not every ghost wears a face, and not every prophecy is divine. Some are painted by human hands hungry for attention. The crimson curtain has fallen, but somewhere, in another theater or another mind, someone is still teaching shadows how to move. If you listen closely, you might hear it, the faint rustle of velvet, the whisper of a fall, the echo of applause that refuses to die. Thank you for listening to Somnolent Conspiracies. If this story kept you awake, or made you question the line between art and confession, remember to subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a like. Your support keeps the ghost light burning when every other lamp has gone out. A new investigation begins each week. Another secret, another city, another silence that waits to be broken. Until next time, sleep lightly and trust no shadow.